What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in today. I am thrilled to be joined by Mark Schofield of USA Today and Touchdown Wire. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk some 49ers. You all ready?
I'm ready to go, Zach. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to talk a little Jimmy Garoppolo and a little 49ers today.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. The 49ers acquired Jimmy Garoppolo a couple years back now. What were your thoughts on him up until that point?
A couple of things. I think it's fair to point out at this point, and if my accent doesn't give it away, I'm originally from the Boston area, so I'm a Patriots fan. And so there was a part of me that was a bit upset when this trade was made because I looked at Garoppolo as the future at the quarterback position for the New England Patriots. But I think when you look at the acquisition, and it's important to take a step back previous to the trade itself and look at how the Patriots view the quarterback position. And prior to the draft, Daniel Jeremiah, former NFL scout, he posted some notes from 1991, I believe, of Bill Belichick's scouted notes that it was a presentation that Coach Belichick gave to scouts on how to scout the various offensive positions. And when you look at Belichick's notes at the quarterback position, it gives you insight into what he values at that position. And number one is to make good decisions. When you look at the rest of the traits they value, it's then arm, size, physically tough, leadership, guys look up to and have confidence in, a real competitor, but accurate rather than guy with a cannon. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. I think that's a great description of Jimmy Garoppolo, both coming out of Eastern Illinois and where he is now. The Patriots and Bill Belichick stress accuracy and ball placement and decision-making at the quarterback position. They don't particularly place an emphasis on arm strength. I think that's part of the reason they coveted Jimmy Garoppolo in that draft class. And I think if you ask Kyle Shanahan about the position, people that got a chance to talk to him down at the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago when they drafted C.J. Beathard, accuracy and ball placement, decision-making, those are the things they value at the position. And I think that's what led them to make this trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. It's somebody that showed that coming out of Eastern Illinois, the decision-making, the accuracy, obviously the quick release. And these are things that he now shows to this point in his career. So I think these are the things that people value in Garoppolo. I think it's a reason why he's one of the upper echelon quarterbacks in the game today.
Oh boy, I'm so glad you ended it with that. We'll get into that in a bit, but he gets a lot of hate online and on social media specifically. And I mean, it's kind of, you could say it's unfair because he's had, a good amount of success early on in his career, but he's still sort of unproven. So I see both sides. When you watched him, obviously you said you were a Pats fan and you watched him get traded to the 49ers. You kind of felt kind of unsure or, about it. What did you think of his performance in 2017? And then how would you compare that with his performance in 2019?
It's always hard to compare one season where a team finishes 6-10 and another season where a team, even though they lost their final game in a Super Bowl. I mean, you make a Super Bowl run, it speaks to what you've done both as a team and as a quarterback, because as much as we try to avoid the QB wins argument, winning is part of the position. It's part of what's valued at the position, the leadership qualities, the competitive toughness qualities that I just mentioned with the Bill Belichick values at the position. I think it was very impressive, though, when you come in and a team's 1-10, you've just been acquired by that organization. You finally get a chance to play and you go 5-0 in those games and you play at a high level. I mean, let's face it, Garoppolo during that 5-game stretch of wins, he played at a very high level, completed 67% of his passes, 7 touchdowns, 5 picks. Those are some pretty good numbers for somebody just acquired by a team that, again, finished 6-10. So I think that was a very impressive string of games. It certainly made Patriots fans, myself included, point out to say, hey, as much as we love number 12, this kid wearing number 10 is pretty good too. And I imagine most Patriots fans would like to see Jimmy Garoppolo still in Patriots blue right now rather than Niners red and gold. But look, they made the Super Bowl last year, and say what you want about how that game ended, missing Emmanuel Sanders on that overthrow. He was a big part of why they got to a Super Bowl. He was a big part of why they, had the number 1 overall seed and had a home game in the NFC Championship game. So both were very impressive runs. But it's hard to look at a season that ends with you in the Super Bowl as, anything but a success.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. He played really well, throughout the season. There were a couple games that stand out specifically, the New Orleans game,
Right.
Probably both Arizona games, arguably. And he was, 3/4 of the Super Bowl playing really well. And this is kind of tinfoil hat, conspiracy there's me, but he likely, I don't know if I want to say likely, there's a chance he was concussed. Maybe he took some really big hits in that game. There was one time where he was on the ground for like 10 seconds and even the commentators were kind of like, moving on, but it was really weird. And maybe that played into his decision-making, maybe not. Maybe as a 49ers fan, I'm trying to make excuses, but it's unfortunate the way that things ended. But you did touch on, he's in the top echelon of quarterbacks in the NFL. Recently, the NFL top 100 just came out and he was ranked 43rd overall and the 8th best quarterback on the list. Do you think that's too low, too high, or just about right?
I mean, I think overall it's slightly too high in the sense that I think when you look at the NFL's top 100 as put together by the players, there tends to be an emphasis on the guys that touch the football. I mean, you're seeing a Kyler Murray make it into the top 100, a Josh Allen make it into the top 100. I mean, the guys that touch the football, particularly quarterbacks, seem to get bumped up these lists a little bit more. And maybe that's with reason. I mean, if you're asking the players, if you're asking the peers of these athletes, who are the best players in the game, maybe they appreciate and understand the work that goes into playing the position a bit more than those of us on the outside, even those like myself that study the quarterback position almost exclusively, tend to value them. So from the outside look at it, it seems like it's a bit high, but I think in terms of the position rank and having him as like the 8th best quarterback, I think there's certainly an argument to be made that he's, on the cusp of that top 10, maybe he's in the top 10 for some, just on the outside looking in for others, but if you're the top 12, 15, 10 of quarterbacks in the league, whether it's voted on by your peers or just people, analysts, that's a pretty exclusive club. I mean, we're talking about 32 people on the planet doing a job. I mean, when you get to that level of excellence, even if you're like a top 20 quarterback, it's still a pretty impressive feat. So I think maybe 43rd overall in the league might be a bit too high. But when you get into that sort of 8, 10, 12 range, I mean, those are really quarterbacks that are sort of clustered together. I think it's about right. I always appreciate Mike Sando, who does the quarterback tiers each offseason, each summer, as voted on by 50, general managers, scouts, evaluators, and things like that. They had sort of Garoppolo in that sort of, I think, tier 2. I think that's about right. I mean, they're like that top tier guys, the Mahomes, the Russell Wilsons of the world, where it's like, yeah, these are the best of the best. And then that next group, like the Wentzes, the Daks of the world, you put Jimmy, you put Kirk Cousins perhaps in there. I think that makes some sense to me.
Hopefully he keeps improving up, but that's a really good way to put it. 32 people on the whole face of the planet can do this job, and he's in the top, third of that. So he's doing something right, regardless of.
You don't get to be a quarterback in the National Football League if you aren't doing something right. I mean, even the guys that we might say maybe, aren't the best at it, they're still better than almost everybody else alive. So they deserve some credit for just getting there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, great point. Kyle Shanahan was recently on the Chris Sims podcast, and he was talking about combining the simplicity of his father's offense along with some more complex, explosive components of John Gruden offense. Do you think that's kind of what makes his offensive system one of the best in the league?
I think so, Zach. I think what's fascinating about Shanahan's offense and the 49ers offense, if you sit down and you read their playbook, if you study the Shanahan system, a lot of it isn't really new. A lot of what they're running is right out of a Bill Walsh 1980s 49ers playbook. It's West Coast stuff out of 21 personnel, and kind of what's old is new again in a sense, because we've seen this trend, and football is so cyclical in terms of the schematics of it. With teams working toward more spread offense, defenses have tried to counter, they've tried to adjust, so they've gotten lighter and faster. The basic 3-4 versus 4-3 debate is over. Now the debate is 4-2-5 versus 3-3-5. How are you going to get lighter and faster to match up to the spread offenses? So what's Shanahan done? He's turned back the clock. I mean, this is a team that you look last year, no team ran 21 personnel, 2 running backs, a tight end, 2 wide receivers, more than the 49ers. They ran it on 28% of their snaps last year, 312 plays. But what did they do on that? They threw it a ton. They threw it 40% of the time when they did that. They had a successful pass percentage of almost 60% out of that. And Garoppolo had a quarterback rated, a passer rated of 103.3 with a yards per attempt of 9.7, which was better than his yards per attempt of 7.7 when they were in 11 personnel. So what they're doing is they're getting defenses into base, and then they've got guys like, George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk that are matchup problems for linebackers. And so what he's done is run a simplified 1980s West Coast offense out of 21 personnel against defenses that aren't built to stop 21. They're built to stop 11. They're built to stop 10, like the Arizona Cardinals, for example. That's a 10 personnel offense. And so what he's done is a simplified West Coast offense with matchup nightmares like Juszczyk and Kittle out of that 21 personnel package to attack base defenses to get linebackers chasing those guys where they don't have a chance. And of course, Shanahan is a very creative offensive mind, like some wrinkles like leak and throwback and things like that. There's certainly stuff that Walsh wasn't running, but you mix that in with everything else, it's tough to stop as a defense. And so he deserves a lot of credit for what he's put together. But I think that point is apt. It's a simplified system out of a base personnel that defenses aren't built to stop these days.
I'm so glad you brought up Kyle Juszczyk, because I think that's the perfect example of turning back the clock. I don't know. I think they were the only team in the NFL, if I remember, or two other teams or one other team that had a fullback on their roster. So that's just a perfect example. And that kind of leads me to my next question. He uses a lot of versatile players. How does that aid in the overall play packaging and play designation simplicity?
Right. Well, it's a fascinating question, Zach, and it's one of the things that Shanahan does so well. This is a matchup league. It's a matchup sport right now. Particularly it starts like so many things do on the offensive side of the ball, right? Whether it's Shanahan, Sean McVay, Josh McDaniels, those are three I think are the best offensive minds in the game right now. And there are certainly others, but those are the guys I love to study. And what they do so well is identify matchups, and then when they get advantageous matchups, they exploit them. Shanahan does it with personnel, with 21 personnel. Sean McVay goes the other direction. He runs almost exclusively 11, but he then runs out of 11. So you're running against the lighter packages. A lot of what Josh McDaniels does, he uses pre-snap motion and shifting to get those mismatches. So it puts your players in a position to be successful, right? If you're Kyle Shanahan, you have an incredibly talented tight end in George Kittle. You might get lazy. It's easy to say, look, he's going to run away from guys, right? I could just trust him in his matchups. No, he takes it a step further and uses 21 personnel to get him matched up against linebackers, because you want to put your best guys in a position to be successful. Josh McDaniels, he has arguably the best quarterback of all time in Tom Brady. He might think, I'll just let Brady read defenses. No, he uses motion and shifting to give Brady those pre-snap indicators, man versus zone, something Shanahan also does as well. But he gives his quarterback more information before the snap to put him in a position to be successful. And then when you get into sort of those matchups, you can then exploit them. And in terms of the versatility, when you have a fullback like, say, Kyle Juszczyk, that can almost be like a tight end, it allows you to shift to almost a 12 personnel package, 2 tight ends on the fly. And if you have a scenario where he's getting favorable matchups against inside linebackers, you can then exploit that. So versatility, whether it's a guy like Kittle, a guy like Juszczyk, some of the other players we're seeing, it certainly helps you because, as defenses try to adjust, you're still a step ahead of them with a versatile player like a Kittle, like a Juszczyk. So, yeah, you put these pieces together. It's tough for teams to sort of defend what the 49ers are putting on a week-to-week, snap-to-snap, drive-to-drive basis.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. Kyle Juszczyk really kind of broke the mold when it comes to fullbacks. Right. You don't see too many like him in the NFL. And I think Kyle Shanahan, at the time of signing him, everybody was saying, you overpaid. Can't believe they paid that much for a fullback. And I'd make the argument they've gotten every penny out of their investment back, because he's been a fantastic weapon for them. And I think it shows when he's on the field, they're much more dynamic and versatile than when he's not.
And Zach, it's a copycat league, right? And so what are we seeing around the league right now? We're seeing some other teams move towards a fullback type model. The Vikings, they used the fullback at times last year. The Browns, they just acquired Andy Janovich via the Denver Broncos to use a fullback in their offense. Obviously, Kevin Stefanski was the offensive coordinator for the Vikings last year, so that might make some sense. And look at what's happening in Green Bay, right? You're seeing Matt LaFleur, who's spent some time familiar with, what they're doing, the San Francisco 49ers 49ers are doing schematically. They draft Josh DeGuara, a tight end H-back type. And when they made that pick, what was the name referenced? It was Kyle Juszczyk. And Matt LaFleur said, look, we want to have a 49ers type offense, and we need him to be our Kyle Juszczyk. And so, like I said, football is cyclical. We're seeing some more of these teams work back to a 21 personnel model. New England as well with James Devlin before he decided to retire. The fullback is coming back into vogue. And if it's a player like Juszczyk who could be that mismatch nightmare, all the better for an offensive coordinator or a head coach who's calling the plays, because you get those matchups.
Well, we'll have to see how many fullbacks make it back. Hopefully a lot more. I love the position personally.
Look,
it's a fun one to watch.
It is a fun one to watch. It's a great one to study. And Emily Van Buskirk, Sideline Sass podcast. She has the hats, make fullbacks great again. She's got a podcast basically dedicated to the fullback, giving Emily a shout out. You can find her at MLM on Twitter. But yeah, she's got a whole show dedicated to the podcast, to the position. So I'm betting she wants them to come back in vogue too.
Oh, that's awesome. Last question here on the 49ers offense before we move to some rapid fire, kind of more fun questions. They will have Jalen Hurd and Trent Taylor, hopefully both coming back from injury. They drafted Brandon Ayuk. They have Deebo Samuel when he returns from injury coming into year 2. Dante Pettis is also still on the roster. Kendrick Bourne, who has been a touchdown and first down machine. Do you see their offense transitioning more from a run-first offense to more of a balanced or possibly even pass-first offense?
I would think so, Zach. I mean, you look at last year, this was a team that, ran the ball 52% of the time, just about. In terms of their pass to run ratio, they were second to last in the league. And, passing percentage was 48% of the time they threw the ball. Only Baltimore was lower with 45 with their sort of diverse run game that they had. I think Shanahan would like to be a bit more 60-40. That's where most teams tend to be right now. I mean, after you got, Baltimore, San Francisco, Tennessee at 51, Minnesota at 51, you started getting to the 50s and upper 50s, low 60s pretty quickly. More teams are in that sort of 60-40 range. I think with the talent that they have at wide receiver, the diverse group of receivers they had with the things they can do schematically with those guys, it wouldn't surprise me to see them to be, maybe 55-45 this year. But a lot might depend on, how the games play out. And let's face it, the timeline we're living through right now, depending on who's healthy, things might play differently from week to week based on who's healthy, who's not. Some weeks you might have your receivers, some weeks you might not. So a lot of it is up in the air. But I think in an ideal world from Shanahan's perspective, he'd like to be more 55-45 or even 60-40, throwing it a little bit more than they did last year.
Yeah, certainly nothing is normal anymore.
No,
so I guess there's going to be so many things that we're going to have to kind of have that wait and see attitude. But moving into kind of a rapid fire, you can answer these with as little or as many words as you want. Is Kyle Shanahan the coolest head coach in the NFL?
He's got to be at least top 3, right? I mean, I look at this. I think I'll go McVay 3, Shanahan 2. It might pain your listeners to hear this, but Cliff Kingsbury won. And Cliff Kingsbury won this when they showed that picture of him at his James Bond style lair before the draft with the no socks and the loafers. You got the Arizona pad with the fire pit in the backyard. I mean, Nora Princiotti, who I think the world of, who now writes for the Ringer, she basically said that you have to have the next Bond film with him as Bond and then Jerry Jones as the villain with the yacht. Okay. Because Jones was doing the draft when it was yacht, which is pretty cool as far as owners go. But Shanahan's top 3, probably number 2 to Cliff Kingsbury, which isn't bad. But we could be honest, not a lot of cool head coaches, right? I mean, because then you had the juxtaposition of Bill Belichick, who obviously I love dearly. We went to the same college, but he's at his house in Nantucket with a pretty plain looking dining room with his dog Nike sitting at the laptop. Belichick's not exactly cool. We just saw Belichick sitting on a park bench doing an ad for Subway, sucking down a foot lawn. Not exactly cool there. But yeah, Shanahan's, I'd say, number 2 to Cliff Kingsbury. And it's tough to beat that pad, man. It's tough to beat that draft site.
Alone with the name of Cliff Kingsbury, that's hard to beat. That's like a supervillain name.
It is hard to beat. We can also be honest. All 3 of them, very good-looking men. I mean, we could say that. Yeah. These are 3 good-looking men. So, kudos to all 3 of those guys.
Yeah, I remember when Emmanuel Sanders was acquired, he was having a press conference. And he's like, "I told my wife my head coach is wearing Yeezys." You
Yeah,
don't see that too much.
exactly. Yeah, you don't see that too much, man. Not from what we usually see from NFL head coaches.
Next rapid fire question: Debo Samuel over or under 1,000 yards receiving?
I think this might come down to how a lot of his plays are designated. Because he does get a lot of screens, jet sweeps, things like that. I'm sitting here right now, and I'll say I'll take the over on it. I think obviously with the Emmanuel Sanders, his transition to New Orleans, Brandon Ayuk's dealing with an injury. I'm going to go over on this, but he might get dinged. Some of his plays might end up being technically runs. If they're screens and things like that sometimes get designated as runs because they're behind the line of scrimmage or they're backwards throws. That might sort of sink into some of his yardage, but I think ideally, in an ideal world, yeah, it's going to be the over.
I have one more after this, but last football one. Will Raheem Mostert kind of cement his position as the lead running back for the 49ers?
I think so. And I want to reference a fascinating piece over at Roto World. Hayden Winks did this piece just in the last couple of days about the 49ers and how historically Kyle Shanahan has handled the running back position, because a lot of people say, oh, it's going to be a running back by committee. That's what Shanahan always does. And he kind of blew that myth up because he looked back historically at how he's handled the running back position. And then he made the case, look, there's a guy that fits the bill to be the bell cow back that Shanahan really hasn't had in a while. And it is Raheem Mostert. And what he says is among running backs with 100 carries last year, Mostert was first in yards per carry over expected, third in Pro Football Focus rushing grade, 30 yards after contact per attempt, third in their elusiveness rating, and fifth in breakaway percentage. Some of that will regress, but those numbers are legitimately good and are clearly on another level compared to Tevin Coleman. When you look at yards per carry plus minus, Mostert plus 1.5, Coleman minus 0.1. Yards after contact per carry, Mostert 3.5, Coleman 2.7. You look at so many different ways to evaluate the running back position. Raheem Mostert looks like he could be the guy. So, yeah, I'd say he establishes himself as the running back in that room next year.
It's great to see, especially from a guy who's been cut 5 or 6 times. Yeah. I forget the number, but he's having success. And that's why I was kind of so taken back by his trade request from his agent, Brett Tessler. I'm like, this is a perfect marriage here. Don't mess it up.
I think a lot of that was a negotiated ploy, and it seems to have worked out in his favor. But, yeah, I do think this is a great situation for him.
Yeah. All right, last question for you, Mark. Is water wet?
Is water wet? I think, man, you throw me back to some of my philosophy classes in high school. I think, yes, water is wet because while we may not feel it, if we are standing and looking at an ocean from afar, the granules of sand at the base of the ocean, they are wet. And we know this. We know this from experience. We don't have to touch it physically to understand that it is wet. The shells in the ocean, if you somehow have a shell wash ashore and pick it up, it's not technically still in the ocean, but it is wet. So yes, water is wet.
Great explanation. Thank you so much, guys. Make sure you go and follow Mark. His handle is below on the screen. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today to talk Jimmy Garoppolo, 49ers. I really appreciate it.
Zach, thank you so much, man. I got to say, look, I've done a lot of shows. I've never gotten that closing question before. Kudos to you on that one. That was a good one, man. I did not see that coming. I had to think of it. Like I said, look, I was a part philosophy major in college, so that really took me back, my friend. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Have a good one.
You too, Zach.